So hello, this is GP Dev's Meetup Code Reviews with Colby. I don't actually remember what number we're on. I want to say it's 4 or 5. But regardless, yeah, this is all about what code reviews are, kind of why we do them, best practices, and I'll have an example that I'll share in a minute here. But yeah, that's kind of what this one's about. So for those who haven't worked at a company where you need to do code reviews, maybe you're the only developer, maybe you haven't actually worked at a software company yet. Code reviews are a way that we can ensure code quality throughout the company. They're a great way for junior devs to learn more about the code base. So you can see all the changes being made. You can see how we would typically make changes and see kind of best practices in the code review itself, in the pull request, I mean. That's kind of why we do them. Try and catch bugs, try and catch things like typos. Maybe we're adding something that we don't need to, like maybe we're adding an NPM library that there's already one in the code base that does something similar, so we wouldn't need to add that. Yeah, that's kind of the why. What they are, we already kind of talked about that. So maybe I'll just share. I'm just going to use GitHub as my example. I want to share. Where is it? This one. Okay. So and GitHub is nice because you can actually look. There's lots of open source repositories that you can just jump in, look at pull requests, and see changes, see how other people are making changes. But for this example here, this is a very simple change. All we're doing is adding a tag to a header file. So generally what I like to do is, obviously you want to name this a little bit nicer. So update page, that's a pretty bad name. So maybe I would do something like add meta tag to header, just to give the reader more context of what you're actually doing. Similarly, there's a description spot on most repository hosters. And so if you're working in a company, I'd probably put the Jira ticket in here. But otherwise, I would add a small description like this PR adds a new meta tag to the header. And so basically when your reviewers are coming in, they're actually going to see what this does. Just seeing a wall of text or a wall of code it forces the readers to actually go into the code to grab the context first. Whereas if you give it to them in plain English right off the top, it's a little easier for the reviewers to go in and say, oh, okay, we're adding a tag. That makes sense. That's kind of that's the point of this PR. So they have a better understanding before they even look at the code of the problem that you're trying to solve with this code. So if we go into the files changed, this structure, it obviously looks different if you're using GitLab or Bitbucket or something else, but the basic idea is always the same. You're going to have the code added, and if you deleted code, you'd have code deleted. In this case, all we're doing is adding a single line here with the meta tag. So we're adding an OG description tag with the content of the description variable. So if I was reviewing this, I would probably just approve this. There's not much to here. It's pretty straightforward, but let's say there's a typo in our OG description. I'd add a comment saying like typo here. And then if it's something easy to solve that you can see, you can always suggest, oh, I would maybe do this approach. I like to link articles if I have like, oh, I want to do an early return here. Here's an article of why that would be a good style of programming to do. Just so you have a little bit of backup in what you're saying. So it's not just, oh, I just like that. So it's personal preference. So it's hard to be subjective and unbiased when you're reviewing code, because you're not reviewing code to change it to your style. You're reviewing code to make sure that there's no issues, there's no errors, you're not introducing anything that's going to break something, and it kind of follows the style of the code base, not the style of the author. Of course, this is all different company to company. your mileage may vary, but that's kind of what you're doing as your main objective. So I'm just going to start my review. You'll see here it's just pending. GitHub is nice. You can add a bunch of comments at once without actually publishing them. So if you have like a 30 file PR, you can actually go through, review everything at your own pace, and then you can finish your review. You can leave a generic comment. You can simply comment it, you can approve it, or you can request changes. Oh, I can't approve this because I wrote it. But normally I could approve this and then the author can merge it in. Any questions so far about kind of the structure of how a pull request is? Okay, so one thing that I do want to point out that a lot of people tend to kind of get scared of, especially newer people in software, or if you're new at a company, it's very intimidating to review PRs. You're scared that if you said this is good and then it breaks, that, well, Colby said it's good, so it's Colby's fault. Ultimately, this comes down to the company's culture, of course. As any answer in software, it depends. But typically, most companies have a nice environment where the author of the PR is responsible for the PR and responsible for the code in it. The people reviewing it and approving it aren't responsible if something breaks. It's the author's fault. And it's the author's responsibility to fix it. And I find that once more people know that going in, they become less scared to approve PRs because they're not as, maybe the pressure isn't as great because you're not responsible if production goes down. It's still the author who wrote the code. You just approved it. So that's something I always want to tell people, that, and of course this depends on the environment that you're in and the culture of the company. But if most companies will have in my experience, a pretty decent PR culture, in a sense that they want you to feel comfortable to approve PRs and to create them, because that's kind of what you're doing there, is contributing code, contributing ideas, and there's many different ways to do that. Either you write the code, you can obviously review the code, which are two really good ways to contribute. And they both add a lot of value. And I find that sometimes reviewing is harder than writing the code itself. Especially if it's like, let's say you have a really difficult logic piece that you're adding, and it took you like an hour to get into like the mindset of, oh, I understand what this is doing, and then you just throw the PR at someone. It's like, can I get a review? And they're like, why are you doing all this? And you're like, oh, I have to do this, and then to get this, and once we have that, we can do this. And I find when I have like those tougher PRs, it's really beneficial to just jump on a call with somebody and share your screen and go through the PR together. Say, oh, I did that because later on we need that variable here and it's not initialized yet over here. And then your reviewer isn't wasting time trying to figure out what you were thinking at this point in time, because you can just tell them. That being said, that's a really easy way to let your bias slip through and say, oh, don't worry about that, that's tested. So that's kind of a hard line to balance, but ultimately I think it adds more value than it would remove. So I find myself doing that quite a bit. It's a really great learning experience for newer people in the code base to review, maybe not just review, but just to read all the PRs, because you're getting a really easy way right to your email every day of code being added to the code base you're working on. So that's really helpful, especially in a huge code base where maybe 50% of is legacy and no one touches it anymore. Then oh, this area is kind of what we work on, because this is the only area getting PRs too. So that's a nice way to see visibility on the code base itself. One thing that I like to do is try and prioritize your code reviews, because if the PR doesn't get approval and reviewed, depending on your company, of course, it won't get merged, and then the ticket won't get closed, and then the feature never gets added or the bug never gets fixed, and you're just slowing everything down. So I try and prioritize reviews. I'm not saying drop everything to do your reviews, because, oh, excuse me, as you know, you get into your own headset or your own mindset when you're coding, and context switching is the kind of the productivity killer. But like, I always like to start my day with code reviews because my mind's fresh, and it's a nice way to jump in, especially if you're in different time zones, because everybody's either sleeping still or they're finishing their day. That's kind of my big ones. You can always, obviously, if there's an issue, like there's a typo here, obviously point that out. But I find not a lot of people point out like, oh, like cool things. Like, let's say someone added a feature, like, oh, I didn't know that you could do that in this language. Like, that's really cool. And oh, like, I love what you did here. Like, thumbs up. Like, any kind of feedback is good. As like, positive feedback is just as good as well. And a lot of people don't do it. And so I know it doesn't really add value, but it makes the author feel more sure of what their solution was, that's for sure. And it makes them feel good, which is always a nice thing. That's pretty much kind of what I want to talk about. Cole or Philip, do you guys have any questions or comments? Maybe Philip, anything you've encountered in your own code reviews?
Sorry, I'm still in a noisy environment here, but
Yeah, no problem. Cole, do you have any questions about anything we talked about today, or maybe anything you want to know more about?
Yeah, like I'd say, like I'm not at a company yet, but when I am, would you suggest, like in reference to code reviews, if like you've built out like a very large feature to like be like you said, like get on a call with somebody, but like in your pull request, would you say be like as descriptive as possible without like having a paragraph that somebody has to read to like look at?
Yeah, I like to do like me personally, I like to read like lists, like bullet points. And so I
Okay.
always like to try and do bullet point kind of what the PR is about, if it is like, if you need more text than just one line. But that's me personally, how I like to
Okay.
consume information, but definitely you should add some kind of message about at least what the feature is. And like maybe there's something weird in there. You're like, I know like in this section there's some weird stuff happening, but I couldn't get around it. So
Okay.
people kind of have a warning like, well, why don't you do this? Well, I did try that, but it didn't work. So
Yeah.
sometimes that's beneficial. But
Okay.
what you said about the large PRs actually just triggered something in my head. And keep your PRs as small as you can, like realistically as small as you can. It's just so much easier to read a 3-file PR than a 300 file PR.
That's fair.
Obviously, if possible. I mean, sometimes you can't help it, but yeah, if you can break the feature down into smaller parts and get it reviewed even ahead of time. Like, a lot of things I like to do is, if it's a really big feature or really tough feature, I like to create the PR right from the beginning, and just so
Okay.
people can I can get feedback early on my approach. And like, maybe even if, like, let's say I am ready for a review on Friday, I would create the PR on Monday or something and have it just out there for people to look at. I find that
Okay.
helps, especially gathering feedback from your team. Like, maybe you're doing something like, oh, all that can be done with this we already have, because you never know,
Yeah,
right?
that's fair.
So I like to, but I always preface like my titles with like, oh, it's a work in progress. Like, this isn't like really ready for review, but like, I'll gather feedback kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
But if you just tell people that, then they're usually pretty receptive to that.
yeah, the minimum, it's always nice that if you're doing like refactoring or some of that, applying code styles or stuff like that, if you at least put that in a separate commit is always nice.
Definitely, yeah. Like if Yeah, you like if you're like linting or something and everything changes, like just don't sneak in any code changes in there. Just say this is all just file changes. Like do that separately because no one wants to
Yeah.
review all the files and there's no code changes in here. What am I doing?
Yeah, that's fair.
That's a very good call out, Philip. Yeah, I can't think of anything else I wanted to mention. Let me just my notes here. Yeah, they're definitely. I mean, like it's very helpful when you have obviously more than one person working on the team. But even like some of my like personal projects where I'm the only developer, I still create PRs and I still review the code like in github.com or whatever. 'Cause I don't know why, but I've noticed I've caught stuff that I didn't catch in my editor.
Okay.
It might even be just like the different like the look and feel and the context is a little bit different. Is that maybe you kind of look at it with a different point of view. But I've definitely caught a few things even just reviewing my own code. So I usually review my code on the PR before I even tag any of my team members. Because I've caught stuff like, oh yeah, I forgot to fix that. I will fix that now. Like if you rename a variable test or something like that, like catch it before anybody else does.
Yeah.
But they definitely add value. I know they slow down some things, but the amount of time that you would save trying to fix stuff, maybe that someone else just could see, it's invaluable, I think. Although some companies do have like, oh, so and so, he's the lead, and only he reviews code. And there's 10 other developers at the company that probably could, but they don't. It's just Mr. Lead.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that obviously slows down everything, and that doesn't really add as much value as everybody could look at it. I think that, I mean, like maybe don't merge it unless he approves it, but you should probably allow everybody to review it and give their 2 cents, because, I mean, you never know, right?
Yeah.
Software is like that. If anybody have anything else they wanted to ask or chat about? Otherwise, we can probably end this early. Cool. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you everybody who's watching this in the future. 'Cause this is being recorded. So, of course, if you have any questions or you want some help with how to do code reviews, just shoot me a message on Discord. I'd be happy to help you out. And yeah, thank you very much.